Welcome to INDIgenesis Online. I want to thank all of you for being here and trying something new with us. I first of all want to thank Cheryl Mosley and Moving Image team, Deb, Kelsey, and Michael, for your support and love during this past year to make really INDIgenesis happen and really today happen. Thank you to the marketing team, design team, and anyone who I may have missed. I want to give you a special thank you to Stephanie Autumn, who is our advising elder for the film series and the Sundance Native and Indigenous program. Thank you for your continued support of INDIgenesis. So a little bit of housekeeping. If there are any technical difficulties and we lose you in the Zoom meeting, check your emails for a new meeting link. And then please put your questions in the chat box for us to answer. Thank you. So again, my name is Missy Whiteman. I belong to the Northern Arapaho and Kickapoo Nations. I reside in Minnesota, and I'm a filmmaker, writer, director, producer, and I also am a guest curator for INDIgenesis film series. This is the third season of this film series, and it comes after the legacy of the Two Rivers Film Festival, which began in the 1980s and was started by the Two Rivers, the Native Art Circle, which was a collective of Native artists in the Twin Cities and Minnesota areas. So we as Indigenous people have adapted during times of uncertainty and change, as did our ancestors did before us. So in the spirit of those who came before us and honoring our Indigenous filmmakers who are with us today, we invite you to the virtual screening of INDIgenesis film series. So thank you everyone for being here. This film series was to take place March 19th, 2020. And what we've done here is adapted 3 of the shorts programs for online viewing. Today we have filmmakers from Indigenous Lens, Our Reality. I'd like to welcome all of our filmmakers here today and our special guest, Adam Piron. Let me know if I pronounced that wrong. I'm sorry. I'm really bad at
pronouncing. No, it's Piron. It's all good.
Piron. I didn't know if there's an accent or not.
No, just Piron. Yeah.
Thank you. It's not like Piron. Okay.
No.
All right. So I'm going to do an intro for Adam. And I met Adam how many years ago? Like 2014, a while ago.
Yeah, around then.
Yeah, before like a lot of life changes. So, so you're from Southern California, yes?
Yeah, I'm based out of I guess you could say the greater Los Angeles area. I'm the film curator for the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA. I'm also a short film programmer for the Sundance Film Festival, the Imaginative Film Festival, as well as AFI Fest. And yeah, I'm from the Kiowa and Mohawk tribes. So yeah.
And then you're also the co-founder of the film collective Cousin.
Yeah, I'm one of the co-founders, along with Sky, Alex Lazarovich, and Adam Khalil. So we started that in 2018 when we were all together at the Flaherty Film Seminar, and since then we've sort of essentially, like, I'll let Sky talk about it as well too. But our mission is to support Indigenous artists internationally making experimental work. So.
And why is that important?
I mean, I think it's, I think that there's a lot of room for Indigenous filmmakers to tell the type of stories that they want. And I think part of the reason that we wanted to create Cousin was specifically to support, again, like Indigenous filmmakers making experimental work, just because like the level of support out there for, I think just in terms of like that type of work, whether you're Indigenous or not, is really hard to come by. And then if you're Indigenous, it's, even slimmer. So I think we wanted to do something along those lines, as well as sort of like just with us sort of knowing Indigenous artists that are working in this space and, being, I think like really excited about a lot of the work that's been coming out of there recently, and just trying to, support it and to help sort of keep a momentum behind it as well.
Mm, thank you. Um, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go around and have the filmmakers introduce themselves. I'm going to start with you, Sky. So Sky's film lore is in our online film series, and I met Sky, I don't know how long, was it our first INDIgenesis or a second one? I'm trying to remember. Maybe it was the second one? Yeah. So, all right, go ahead, Sky.
Hello, my name is Sky Hopinka. I'm Ho-Chunk and Pachunga, and I primarily work with experimental forms of video and filmmaking. I also do photography and some writing, and just really anything that tries to circle around different ideas of Indigenous homeland, landscape, language, and what are different modes of trying to work through those, I don't know, different aspects of culture and identity through these different mediums. And it's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sky. And we're going to move along. Here we have Erin Lau, who I met, we figured out today 10 years ago. And this is right after she graduated high school at the All Roads, National Geographic All Roads Film Festival. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself. The film that she has in our film series, The Moon and the Night. Okay, and go ahead, Erin.
Aloha kako, everyone. I am Kanaka Maoli, so that's native Hawaiian, and I made the film The Moon and the Night, also known as Kamahina Ame Kapo. During the day, I am a senior producer director for the digital media company Jubilee Media, and during the night, I'm making weird artsy films that most people don't really understand. But I have taken this journey because I found that film for me was a way of processing difficult relationships and experiences and questions I had, and that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years.
Thank you, Erin. And do we have Shane on the call as well?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, Shane, how's it going? I haven't seen you in a while. We're going to introduce you as well. We'll have you talk about yourself and your work. We have your film, Minu Bimand is a Win. And go ahead and have you introduce yourself.
Buju Ani. My name is Shane McSabi. I wrote and directed Minnow Bimadzwin, and I am a filmmaker. I write and direct films, and I'm currently studying at NYU to get my master's degree in filmmaking. I'm in my second year, and so since Minnow Bimadzwin, I've made 4 films just for the 2 years that I've been at Tisch. And I'm currently in post-production for my film Happy Thanksgiving. I've grown up loving cinema and films, and I grew up at the movie theater, and I like to think that I see the world in an interesting way, and have a lot of things to say. And I really love films, and I just want to keep making them. So.
Thank you, Shane. And then I was just kind of peeking through right now, and I see Holly Nordlum there. Hi, Holly. She's also a Sundance Native Lab Fellow, or part of the Sundance family, much like all of us here. She actually did my tattoo that I have right here when I was in Alaska, so it's from Holly. Amazing filmmaker as well, and traditional tattoo artist. Okay, so I'll just pass the mic to you, Adam, and if you want to start conversation or start with a question, it's completely up to you.
Yeah, sure. I think kind of going off of the prompt that we've been talking about, like specifically around, I guess you could say, an indigenous tradition of being adaptable, and specifically kind of like not only I think within terms of like the time that we're in now, but I mean, I'd sort of like keep it at somewhat of an open prompt for all the filmmakers here. Like, how has adaptability played specifically within your work? Because I think one of the things, obviously we're all working primarily kind of from our own means, and also within sort of just like, you know, leaning into some of your strengths that you have specifically in terms of your films. And yeah, I guess I'm just curious about how you guys approach your films, and specifically about that in terms of the adaptability of the means at your disposal. Sky, how about you go first?
Sure. I don't know. I feel like my entire filmmaking career has been built around adaptability, or just trying to find ways to either teach myself what I don't know, or find someone to teach me the things that I need to know, and to just really work with whatever material I have or whatever equipment I have, and try to make the most out of whatever situation I'm in, and use the limitations or the restrictions of, you know, again, whatever footage or I have, or whatever sound pieces I have, and try to construct them in such a way that is reflective of, I don't know, whatever I'm thinking through at the moment, whether it is about land, language, or anything in between. And I'm muting myself now.
Aaron, how about yourself? Because I know specifically with your film, it was a bit of a long journey in terms of essentially from when it started to kind of when it ended, but also how it played within when you were going to school. I'm curious about how adaptable you were, in the sense of like you were based out of LA and then you were going back to Hawaii a lot to shoot this, and you know, sort of like what was your journey in terms of this, in terms of like just being adaptable in terms of making your own film?
Yeah, I hope this answers the question in the right way, but there's a few different things that come to mind when I think of adaptability. One is, for me, and I actually don't think I did this with The Moon of the Night. I think I may have over catered to a Western form of filmmaking. But when I think about filmmaking after that film and now, I'm trying to think of like, how do I adapt my films more to an Indigenous way of thinking and storytelling? Because I think when I had more limitations on myself, because The Moon and the Night, to give more context, is my thesis for my master's program at Chapman. And I had more resources than I've ever had. And that's a wonderful thing. But I also have noticed that there are some things I've made in the past that felt more true to my identity on a subtextual level, as like not trying to follow a 3-act structure, not trying to, okay, this is the arc, this is this is this. Like that film almost fell into more of a textbook way of storytelling, and for a number of reasons that could have played for why that happened. But now, as I make films, when I look at that film and I look at the films I want to make, I'm trying to ask myself, how do I adapt my way of telling stories more and more rooted to my identity as a Native Hawaiian, as an Indigenous woman, than so much as what my brain has been wired to tell me is filmmaking. And so that for me has been like the biggest way of like way I'm toying with adaptability, and reminding myself that I think when I was in a film school where honestly that like folks are pretty spoiled with resources, when I was back at the University of Hawaii and our film school was like a room, I think the challenges and the limitations allowed me to like force myself, like, what is my voice? What do I care about? What can I say with the little I have? And whether the adaptability of like whether you have a lot of resources or don't, I think it's sincerity, genuine voice, exposing yourself on a vulnerable level that like comes through most powerful, no matter what you have, and like adapting in that way too, instead of like, I can't make this film because I don't have an Alexa. Like, so I hope that answered the question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that does, and I think it like yeah, no, I think it'll go to my next question. after Shane talks. I guess, like, because with Shane, I know, like with you, I think it's maybe somewhat of a similar situation where, you know, you were working, I know kind of your story where you were working mostly out of your hometown, making some of your films out of there. And I'll tell them a little bit of a story because I know you had mentioned it one time. I mean, it's a pretty great story. It's a very like indigenous like filmmaking way of thing, where I think it was like when you said you got your first per cap check, you went out and like bought a camera. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm curious, like especially with you now too, where it's in some ways you're kind of like, I feel in a different spot than like where Aaron is now, but I mean in the sense that like you are in grad school, so I'm curious how adaptability has played within that in terms of you making your films, whether it's been whether you found yourself sort of like trying to adapt to the methodology that maybe like Tisch expects from its students, or if it's more and you're like learning that for yourself, or if it's a thing of you're trying to adapt your own sort of indigenous lens, so to speak, on your stories.
Yeah, I don't know, I've spent so many of my early years, I mean, I still consider myself in my, you know, my early years, but of filmmaking, but I spent so much time kind of resisting the like the Western form, the narrative 3-act structure, and that kind of continued at Tisch. I tried, but I've started to embrace it more, and I think that it's just a lot of fun to work in now for me, and like it makes it kind of easier in a sense to like write, and it just seems to flow so much more. But yeah, so it's interesting being in New York City and trying to be a filmmaker from Michigan, and all of my stories take place in Michigan and deal with, you know, Michigan and Anishinaabe people. And so working in New York City is so hard because just the acting, like, I mean, the city's full of actors, but then trying to find like native actors or Anishinaabe actors is quite tough. And then telling the stories that I want to tell aren't necessarily New York stories. So like but I have to shoot there for school, at least for last year. But this last film I did for my second year film, it was very Michigan based, and we shot it in Michigan. And so that was my first time making a film from like another state and being in pre-production and trying to work things out in Michigan, which was the hardest, most stressful thing to do, as basically producing, writing, and directing, and then having like 40 hours of classes every week, and on top of that. So I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this story or how I'm answering your question, but I've lost my train of thought. So yeah. You're muted, Adam.
Whoops, sorry about that. I think like kind of going back to what Aaron was saying in terms of adapting, or sort of like, I wouldn't say relearning, but essentially kind of like, I guess you could say not stripping down either, but just like essentially refocusing and reorienting the types of stories that you want to tell, or specifically sort of your creative voice in terms of how you want to tell that to a viewpoint that's authentic to kind of maybe your own indigeneity in terms of how you see the world, or how you want to explore and experiment with certain stories. Aaron, yeah, I'm curious to hear a bit more from you in terms of like what that means in particular, and how, if that's been a thing of, you know, just sort of going off of your own knowledge of your culture and how you've interacted with it, or if it's, if that is something that you have to sort of like go back into to try to figure out how to do that. But I'm curious to hear a bit more about that, and how, like, if this makes sense, like how radical you want it to be versus like maybe trying to find a bit of more of a broader audience for your films. Because I think that is one of the things that, like, as Indigenous artists, and I don't think that this is necessarily like a point of like grievance, at least for me, where it's, you know, the idea that like somehow if you're making something that's more authentic or more sort of like rooted within a certain indigenous cultural mindset, like that you're essentially sacrificing an audience, which I don't think is necessarily true at all. But yeah, I'm just curious to know your thoughts on that, specifically in terms of your own storytelling.
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't even say like I don't think there's anything wrong with making content that's very commercial and extremely accessible. I think where I get concerned is how many are my decisions based in what I genuinely feel is true to who I am and where I'm coming from, or how many are some of my decisions based in because this is what I like went to film school twice. My undergrad and my master's was in film. And so how much of it is me making choices because somebody else has told me this is the way you make a film. And because occasionally that way, some of the ways I was taught and some of the ways that feel right to me do come into conflict. And I think I have made work that has catered too much to one side of the line, as far as not being always genuine to who I am and where I'm coming from. And I think it's become a process for like confronting that. Like, am I making this in a way that feels true to the community and the identity that I'm trying to tackle? Or am I doing this because somebody told me this is how you make a film? So I think that's like the first step. I wish there was a checklist. I mean, I did have an Indigenous film class in Hawaii that kind of had a checklist of like, what is an Indigenous film? And even in that world, with that checklist, it was still a little muddy. It was just trying to like, is it through language? Is it through land playing a character? Is it through X, Y, and Z? And I don't think there's that clear cut of an answer. I'm a little bit in a place of, for myself right now, can an Indigenous film just be because the more closer I come to my traditions and culture and identity and roots, the more the film, it just comes through naturally in the film. And I'm not trying to do this plug and play thing of like, oh, if I just do these things, the film is suddenly Indigenous. And so that I'm trying to be conscious of too. I think the more time and the more I've tried to deepen my roots and my relationship with my community and where I come from, the more that naturally comes through. And it's not just thing of force, and for me right now, that is the clearest answer of achieving that. But as far as like the audience, I am trying to find this way of straddling like what's accessible and what's not. And I think it often does come back to just universal truth of like, just because this film is about like, we're going back to The Moon and the Night, just because it takes place in Hawaii, just because it has unique circumstances, doesn't mean it's not accessible in a way. I think everybody can relate to a feeling, well, maybe not everybody can relate to like wanting to depend on your parents and and feeling betrayed by parents sometimes, and that doesn't work out. I think those more human relationships and connections are where, even if you're not Indigenous, or even if you don't come from the culture, you can still find a way to tie in because those human relationships allow you to. And so for me, that's been the way of like, how do I get a bigger audience? And it's just through that. Yeah.
And I think, no. And I mean, I think like Sky also kind of, I think going off of that, with you have a very specific style, and you can see sort of the development of a voice that's essentially, I would say like very fearless in terms of, it's sort of like putting its own sort of stake in terms of like the identity of where this is coming from specifically, whether that's language or, interpreting certain ideas, like even just sonically through your films with a lot of it. And I wonder with you, I don't know, I guess like, what are some of your own concerns or your own, like maybe worries of making your film versus like kind of like what you believe in and what you want your film to be?
My concerns about making the film versus what I believe in.
Yeah, I mean, like I would assume at least like by now, and specifically because you have such a strong voice in your own filmmaking, you have a certain level of the confidence of like what you can do and what you know you can do through your films, essentially. Versus like
Yeah.
I think when you do make a film, I mean, I think every artist, every filmmaker sort of has concerns about like, can I pull something like this off? Like in some cases, like, will anybody show up to see this? Or, you know, or I mean, or even just like I think in terms of maybe of where it fits within a body of work. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just curious about with you, like kind of where are those concerns or where are some of those own sort of like self-assessed strengths?
No, those concerns are everywhere with everything. I mean, I don't know, I'm always trying to try something new or challenging, whether it is just in filming landscapes in one film or trying to film people that I know and friends that I have in another. And even with the film that's in this program, Lore, that's my first time shooting 16 millimeter. And I had no idea if it would turn out, but I knew that the idea that I was thinking about through this with these photographs that I was cutting up and with these photographs I was making from that, as well as just playing music with friends, that felt like a risk to me because there wasn't anything directly overtly relating to indigeneity within this, as is in my other work. And so that, I mean, it didn't necessarily drive my choice, but it just felt the result of a multitude of different choices that I was making around the content, which was this text that I wrote, and around the photographs, which I was filming, and around my friends who were really important to me in this place that we were together at Harvard for a year, being one of the few minorities on that campus in terms of like who was in the same program we were in. So it felt like I don't know, a combination of all these different elements, and just the result was that it felt riskier for me than some of my other films. And that felt good because usually when I feel like I'm uncomfortable or taking a risk, then I'm usually on a path that I'll feel happier about with the result of the film. And I'm really happy with Lore and the way that it turned out. And I mean, it's challenging in some ways, but it feels like it's me trying something new, and I hope to continue to try new things. And I'll put mute.
It's great. Shane, I think like also with that, I mean, as you know, you've sort of self-assessed, you're at kind of the beginning of, your artistic journey in some ways with film. I mean, like I would argue you're probably a little bit more like in it, but like not, you're not like mid-career yet, but you do have like, I think that there are like a lot of themes that come up in your film where you can see that, there's a specific voice in terms of like what your concerns are and, where you want to take this. And I guess I'm curious, like with you, because so much of it is, I think in some ways, knowing some of your concerns, it's very much tied to a lot of your own activism in terms of like how you want to see Anishinaabe people on screen or just within film. And I'm curious, like with you, if your concerns are more sort of kind of similar to what you were saying in terms of like the story, in terms of like reaching a certain audience, or if it's more about sort of like your own journey in terms of trying to develop a style and trying to, figure out your own voice.
I think I'm always, the main reason I came to NYU is trying to really like shape out, to kind of figure out my voice and where I wanted to go. And I've thought a lot about, how to indigenize cinema or, whatever. And I've kind of just stopped thinking about that completely. And I just want to, every story that I tell, every story that I write is very personal, and it comes from who I am or just my personal experiences. And I think that, like Aaron was saying, that is in itself is what Indigenous cinema is. And because of like the values that I have, that comes into the film, the films of community, of land, of we have in Anishinaabe, we have like the 7 grandfather teachings, stuff like that. Those values come through in the stories that we have that have been ingrained or have been told to us, you know, all of that stuff comes through because every piece of media that we consume, you know, has an effect on us and informs how we see or how we create, regardless of whether we try to act like it doesn't, or say that, you know, what I'm doing is 100% original stuff. It's like, I think it's hard to do that, and we're informed so much by what we take in, and so yeah, like the films that I make are just, they're just like completely open to who I am or to how I feel or see the world, and so I'm trying to expand on that and with everything that I go into, and
yeah. And I think also with that, like, I'll circle back to like Aaron on this one, and Missy, if you have anything, feel free to hop in. I think,
yeah, actually, I did want to say
go ahead.
something, jumping off of what Shane was saying, just about, you were talking about like the 7 grandfather teachings. And I think one of the things that I've been observing, just in the industry in itself and how it functions versus like how we as Indigenous people, especially if you go to ceremonies, if you're traditional, if you, you know, maintain a specific way of life, it is challenging to bring those values into your work, into your film work, especially if you're working in a system that has hierarchy, and has, you know, versus a collective, creative, I guess, like I don't want to say like but just more of a collective process. And you know, that's something too with my work that I've also looked at. But you know, with Indigenous Lens, because we look at Native film, we look at Indigenous cinema, we expect to see, I think, more like documentary films, and we expect to see what people like typically think is Native film versus something that's less linear and more quote unquote experimental. But you know, the way that our storytelling goes, we don't have a linear structure to a lot of our stories. A lot of our stories are secular. A lot of our stories intertwine, and a lot of our stories really have different points of, you know, if we're talking about the story structure, different arches. And I think about I think every Indigenous filmmaker, somebody who has a tribal background, I think struggles with being authentic to like, what are our teachings? How do we incorporate that into our films? And then also, how do we market that for, you know, film festivals? How do we market that for audiences that may not even have an Indigenous perspective or a lens? So that's all I wanted to add to that.
Sure. I think kind of like going off of that, I think Sky, in terms of lore, I think like one of the things that's particularly striking that I always kind of keep coming back to with it is that it directly plays with the medium of film itself. Not just in terms of like the projected like images, but I mean, you know, that it's shot on 16. And, you know, really, I think just sort of taking it back to the roots of what I guess you could say, not, you know, to, like the idea of like what cinema is of a projected image of whether it's something that's physical or not. And I'm just curious a bit more to hear from you in terms of like what your process was behind that, and kind of like what you set out. You had talked about it a little bit in terms of it sort of exploring a time and some of the relationships that you had when you were at Harvard. But yeah, I'm curious to know a bit more about the film, specifically sort of like what you set out, both for yourself in terms of making the film, but also in terms of like what you wanted an audience to experience through it.
Yeah, the first thing was just with these different elements that I was working with. Like I mentioned, you know, the photo series where like the images I'm pulling from began. You have this band practice with friends that are really close to, and then you have the text that I'm reading, which really was the start of the film, where it was something that I wrote with the idea of, do they still think about us? Like, does France still think about us? Does England still think about us? Does Spain still think about us? And like drawing that from the terms of like a breakup, or what it means to be longing or pining for someone, and how abusive that relationship is in a lot of ways. And how, I mean, the text kind of took off from there, but like that was the starting point for it. And just thinking about intimacy in these different realms, intimacy between friends, intimacy between men, and what that looks like, where these are two friends that I have. And, you know, part of our friendship stems around trying to, I don't know, recognize toxic masculine traits within friendships, or just how they exist, but then also, you know, having that space to talk about it, but then also having a space to just be together and to work through that. And so the juxtaposition of like the band practice and the music that we're playing and the photographs with the voiceover is a way to try and overlay all these different ideas and these different emotional planes and registers that, you know, stem from colonization, that stem from toxic masculinity, that stem from just love and loss, and trying to, I don't know, process it all. Because I think a lot of my work is about process, not so much about trying to arrive at answers or conclusions, but trying to work through something. And that's something that I'm hoping that an audience can come along with me as I'm moving through this, where like the voiceover is somewhat relentless, where it's like I'm reading, and I don't necessarily want you to follow every single word. I just want you to kind of listen sometimes, or drift in and out, and to pick up phrases here and there, and to connect to whatever you connect with. And in some ways, it's a bit of a maximalist sort of approach of just like, here's all these elements, and let them surround you and just feel what you feel. And in other ways, it's like very guided and direct in trying to think about its structure and its framework, and whatever sort of language I can create within the body of this film and share it with others to, I don't know, try and figure out what it means to them, rather than trying to tell an audience what it should mean to them. But yeah, so it's like what I was thinking about, and just even just with film too, and these different medias and layers of mediation, and what you have access to or what you don't have access to, and just really it's just about, I don't know, friendship, love, and trying new things.
Well, thanks for that. With sort of going off of speaking of audiences, I've been told it's time to open it up to our participants, everybody that hopped on. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to chime in. Oh, we have one. This one is from Savannah Romero. She asks, as storytellers, you have the opportunity and responsibility to bring about truth and reconciliation through your work. In your words, why is Indigenous representation in film, directing, and screenwriting important? What do you see as the biggest challenge in raising Indigenous voices and creating visibility around Native communities and stories? Anybody want to answer that, or should I just pick one of you guys? I'll go with Aaron. Aaron, you can answer.
Okay, I'll start by saying the moment, I remember the moment that I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker and that I was capable of becoming a filmmaker, and that was because of Ty Songa's film Stones. I saw it when I was 16 years old in high school. And filmmaking for me up until that point was always like it was a hobby. It was something I did to help my family. I don't think I ever considered that it was something I could do. And I don't know why, but there was something about seeing another Native Hawaiian make a film that I thought was captivating and beautiful. And it was the first film to play Sundance that was in the Native Hawaiian language, in the Olelo Hawaii. And so something just clicked when I saw that, and like that is what kind of like ignited this journey most fiercely. And that for me is just an example of like, I don't know, when we don't see each other, when we don't see people who are like us or from our community or remind us of ourselves or make us feel seen, I don't always know if kids or young people or even older people are going to realize what they're capable of without that. Without, I don't know, there was just something about feeling seen in a new way. And that, I just wanted to share that anecdote, because that for me was like, it took another Hawaiian doing it for me to know that I could do it.
I want to talk on that.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, I grew up in theaters and movie theaters. Around my house, there was like a second-run movie theater, so it was like $1 per ticket. So we would go, sometimes twice a weekend. And but those were always mainstream movies and all throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And it wasn't until it was, I don't know, it must have been 11 or 12. And I was digging through these tapes, and I found one in my house labeled Powwow Highway. And this was after Smoke Signals came out, but I hadn't seen that yet. And so I put in Powwow Highway, and it's not directed by a Native or written by, but it does have an entire Native cast. And that was my first time ever seeing like contemporary Natives on film. And films were so important to me at that time. They still are, but they're so important to me. And that feeling that I had of seeing people who looked like me and who looked like my family, like me and my cousins would watch that movie every day, and we would just point out different characters in that movie who were like my, other cousins or like our uncles and aunts, and just hearing like the laughter and that stuff. And then, and then seeing Smoke Signals and the effects that those films had on me, I just can't even, like, I feel like I can't put into words that feeling. And so for me, it's like, I just want to make films that shares that feeling with other people, because we're still not in like a better, yeah, there's a lot more Native cinema now, but it's still like, you have to search for it. You have to like go to a museum, a curation to see it. And a lot of people that I know like don't know about these things. Or so, my biggest dream as a filmmaker is to create films that are able to reach a broad audience, because my biggest dream is to have films like go through the theaters, like nationwide, or whatever. But another part of that is because that going to a brick and mortar theater is community. And when I've done stuff in Grand Rapids, where I'm from, and have done like Night of Native Cinema, and we got a theater, and we're able to show just Native films to like people in the community. And it was just a theater full of Natives, and it was just such a beautiful experience. And like, and to go even deeper, like in communities, there's a lot of lateral violence and stuff that goes on, and a lot of grudges that people hold, and they won't go to the same places that other groups of people go. But like for this, it was just like everybody came together, and it was so beautiful to see like the power of cinema and how it just has this really beautiful effect on people and can bring people together and just make them feel seen and give them that power to like see themselves projected on this giant screen. And so, yeah, those are my goals as a filmmaker. And I think that's super important to me. So
If I can add on a point after everyone's had a chance to talk, that reminded me of something as well.
Go ahead.
I do, going to Shane's point about the power of cinema and the effect it has on us, I also think we consume so much media that I believe it shapes the people we become. Like, I'm a strong believer in that the people we become is shaped by our society. Being that media is a huge part of our lives, especially for kids now, I think the more you consume, the more it'll shape who you become. And if we're not out there balancing what it means to be Indigenous, showing Indigenous stories, showing Indigenous identity through these films, that means there's just that much more other stuff that will shape the young generation and who they become. Because I can think back to things I consumed as a child or that I consume now, and it's all theory, technically, but there are habits I have, there are beliefs I have that I feel like I can connect to the dots. Like, oh, I can see how this subconsciously affected my choices later, because this told me this is how this works. This is who you should forgive. This is what relationships look like. And so I think there's a level of like responsibility in like putting out media that will help shape the people, the young generation, the people they become.
That's a really good point, Erin. And just going back to like thinking about future generations, and then thinking about like the filmmakers that came before us and the people that really set forth the space for us, and like how do we create that wave for future filmmakers? And I think that's something that, you know, the industry also does not support, is that Indigenous way of thinking and understanding about how media, especially as filmmakers, how our media impacts other people. You know, right now there may be somebody who is watching this feed right now, or will be watching the recorded feed, who may have, you know, you may have an impact on them, and deciding, you know, do I want to be a filmmaker, just by the words that you're saying. Like when I was younger, I didn't really have any sort of director to look up to. And then when Chris Eyre came out, you know, with Smoke Signals, it's like there's somebody who made it, but yet at the same time, though, it still wasn't quite the story that I understood, because I grew up, you know, in an urban environment. I grew up in Minneapolis. And so it's like you take these different perspectives and you bring it into the story that you have today, versus maybe what people are expecting an Indigenous film is to be.
I think I'd like, before I answer or ask the next question, I would like to tee up one just based off of, I think, a lot of some of the stuff that everyone's talking about. Do you think, specifically going back to sort of the prompt of adaptability with this, that maybe I'm trying to think of how to say this, like maybe a potential solution is to not necessarily look to an industry or to something larger to allow Indigenous artists just to tell their story, or like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think it's something where I think now we're literally in a situation where if you want to watch something online, you can find a lot of it right now, and you can't go to like a brick and mortar theater. And so what does it look like to you guys to, I don't know, maybe reset, or to start from a place that doesn't necessarily look for the approval or the permission of somebody else to do the type of story that you want to do? Like, what does that look like to you?
For me, that I think that's like really exciting, because I mean, even just to like semi-answer the last question, as far as like the challenge is, I don't know, even like when I first started out making films in 2011, a big part of it was just getting permission to realize that I don't need permission to make the films that I want to make or tell the stories that I want to tell. And like that goes into these larger systems of cinema where the challenge is that the people with the money and the power want you to make certain kinds of films. And what happens when you don't make those kind of films? You don't get funding or support. And so like how then the adaptability comes from just being able to get a camera, whether it's on your phone or a hand-me-down or from whatever you can afford, and then making your own stories and then making your own way, and hoping that people want to watch, and hoping that you can find different ways to share with an audience. And what's really exciting about this time now, maybe one of the few things that's exciting about this time now, is that people are really coming together and sharing their work and sharing their art and sharing their films. And I don't know, I feel like I've talked to more people on like House Party than I have in the last like 2 or 3 months, you know? And like that's like really engaging a communal aspect that's possible, whether it is on a laptop screen or your telephone or your television or whatever. And I don't know, it becomes something more too, where, you know, we don't have to go through these channels that we're told we have to go through. I mean, like, yeah, Smoke Signals and Palo Highway and even War Party were films that were really important to me growing up, but I never felt like I wanted to make those films. As Missy was saying, you know, it's just I felt like there's other ways for me to make work that speaks to who I am and is reflective of my own relationship with my identity and how I view my own indigeneity, and that there's a form to be discovered, and to find that you don't need permission to do that is really empowering.
Any of you guys want to add to that? I'll go on to the next question if you don't want to.
I mean, Sky put it pretty well, so I don't know what to add.
Teed it up, knocked it out of the park. I think, all right, so yeah, one of the other questions we have from our audience is, in this current situation with many of us in quarantine around the world, have you changed your approach to your art, or have any of you done an about face with any ideas? How about you, Shane? You go.
I mean, I just left New York City, and I'm self-quarantining for the next 14 days in this empty house in the woods in Michigan. And I have nothing but time here, and I have my computer, so I'm really just spending the time writing. I don't plan on shooting anything. I don't know. I'm much in a different mindset. I completely I love the hierarchy of a film set, and I like working with crews. And I've been on crews that have challenged the hierarchy, and they've been very tough. And I don't know, I love being able to write and direct. And so but I plan on writing, and so that when this thing is done, I can go out and really, have some stuff that I've been sitting on and thinking about. And so once this is done, I can kind of hit the ground running as far as like what projects I want to pursue, or go out and try to make or try to get funding for. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough to think of like trying to just. I mean, I'm making stuff that I love, and I've been so inspired by. I mean, I'm also not trying to make the next Smoke Signals or Power Highway, but I do love the forms of cinema that I see, and it's not necessarily just American cinema. Like I think that Asian cinema, which is very broad, but like Chinese, South Korea, Japan, is making some of the best films that I've seen ever, like that are coming out lately. And some of those definitely challenge the form, or they have their own form, obviously. And I think that, as Aaron knows, we were peer advisors of the last Sundance Lab, and I was definitely feeling some of those, the inspiration from the Asian cinema, and trying to work those into kind of, taking what I like from those and working those in. But yeah, so I'm taking this time to really kind of think about
rethinking like form and stuff.
Yeah, totally.
I'll go next.
Go ahead.
I think for me, I think one of the silver linings of this, I mean, I actually think there's a lot of silver linings, but I'm not gonna get into that, is I do think we live in a society that doesn't like quiet, that fills itself with distractions. And the benefit of being isolated and having space and distance is that now you kind of don't have an escape and have to confront some harder questions in yourself. And that's scary for most. I know for myself it definitely is, but I think it's important to process and understand yourself on a lot of levels in order to make work that is sincere. So whether that is confronting, what do I believe in, what do I stand against, why do I feel so anxious in this quietness, I think is important. It's important to ask yourself those questions and to process those questions, especially when there's no distractions around. Because I think for me, all of my work has always been an extension of processing that. So like this film exists because I asked myself these questions, and this is like me trying to work through those questions. And on another level, at least as far as related to my job, I do think community is almost extra important now. It's always been important, but it's now even more important because we're isolated. So trying to find ways of like offering comfort in these trying times in a unique way because we can't physically be together has been important for myself and the company I work with, of like, how are we going to tackle this epidemic of loneliness and isolation, depression that is already starting? So those are the kind of things I'm processing and working on. I was already making films about feeling lonely, so this is not new to me. But I think I have asked myself more, okay, this is the challenge for our society that is maybe a little more unique to the times, this epidemic of loneliness. How do I make content in response to that?
Also, kind of just letting any of our participants know that if you do have a question, you can type it down in the chat button in the lower part of the screen. So.
Nice.
I feel like I haven't really done too much other than try to process and watch things I've been meaning to watch. I haven't shaved in 2 weeks. It's not really going that well. Yeah. I've been watching Love is Blind, Tiger
Great
King.
show. Great show.
So it's like been my break from research, I'll just say. But no, yeah, it's been like a time to really just regroup a bit and pause, which has been good. And I don't know, I think I'm still processing it. Definitely, communicating with friends helps, especially like talking about films and art or whatever. And just, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks as far as like where I'm at, but I know that I'm going to try and do my best to get through Tiger King and see what else is on Netflix.
I'm just curious, did you find out if love is really blind?
I think like 20% of the time. So no, but yeah, there's a lot to watch, and like that's been like what's really been really great too. It's just like things that are on my list or things that people are posting and sharing. I mean, yeah, I think yeah, there's so much to watch and revisit.
I wanted to say something just to touch on what both of you two were kind of just talking about. I have this like half-baked thought about before the quarantine really started in New York, we had some friends over, and one left early and was like, I need to go. I'm going to go to sleep early. I need to be productive tomorrow during this quarantine. And I've been thinking a lot about like, what does productivity during a quarantine look like? And I just feel that like so many of these ideas of like of productivity is based in these capitalist ideas that we're kind of forced, that we have formed from society. And like now it's like finally, unfortunately, slowing down. I mean, it's unfortunate events that are causing it to like slow down and kind of give us a little bit of freedom from some of the things that we have to do. And so it's like I've thought a lot about like just allowing ourselves to like think and allow ourselves to like dream and daydream, and how much dreaming is such an important part of our cultures, and how daydreaming has become such a like a negative idea that's kind of associated with lack of productivity. And like now is kind of the perfect time where we can try to allow ourselves, given the circumstances of how stressful everything is, but like really just be forgiving to yourselves and to ourselves, and set aside time just to like allow ourselves to think and daydream to where we can actually do that. So.
Missy, do you know how much time we have for? Oh yeah, closing remarks. Go ahead.
Yep, I was just going to say closing remarks.
That was my.
Wait, are we supposed to say closing remarks, or are you saying closing remarks?
You.
Wait, oh shit. Okay, I'll go then.
Make it count.
Thank you.
Thank you, count.
Everyone at the Walker. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Missy. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, the Walker, and everyone involved. And Shane and Aaron, it's really great talking with you today and hearing your thoughts and seeing your films. And yeah, this is good. This makes me feel good today. So, and thank you everyone for coming and listening and participating.
Do we each go?
Yeah, go ahead, go for it.
Oh, okay.
Teen it up for you.
Everything Sky said, but I guess I'll just add, I don't know, in reference to the times we're living in, this is the time where I think shows truly who we are, and it is a time when we most need to depend on each other. I don't know, I think for me, this is a reminder that the choices we make are not just affecting ourselves, it affects everyone. And so my wrap-up thought for everybody is just love each other, care for each other, comfort each other. Like, that's all I ask.
I just also quickly say just thank you to everybody for being here and for including me in this. It's been very nice to see. I mean, I've been in these Zoom chats. I still have class, so I've been in these Zoom chats, and it's very nice just to see people's faces and to talk to people. So thank you for including me. Thank you for watching the films. And if anybody's looking for a film recommendation, Long Day's Journey into Night by Began is one of the best films that I've seen. So check it out. It's on Canopy for free.
Yeah, I was also going to say thanks to the whole Walker crew. Thanks, Missy. Thanks to all the filmmakers. Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, keep making stuff. I really want to see what you guys are making in isolation. I think it's going to be some wild work a year from now. So
That's so true. It's going to be really interesting times. And thank you so much, Adam, for being a part of this. And I know you're meant to be here in person for the original film series. And I really appreciate all of your efforts that you're here, but also as a filmmaker, and then also the work that you're doing to support other Indigenous filmmakers. Like that's really crucial for the time that we're in, is that, you know, we're doing that as we're helping one another in that way as filmmakers. So I'd like to thank everyone as well for being here on the panel once again. It was so wonderful to see all of you. And I want you all to, in the audience, thank you for coming as well. And we have more, 2 more programs. Again, April 1st, we have a library of Indigenous shorts that we're playing in the Mediatheque at the Walker, which will be live the 1st. And then also we have revitalization, so 3 short films. And I believe that we will be following up with another filmmaker Zoom meeting. And if you haven't seen them, please visit them on walkerart.org. And I want to relay to you all that the adaptability, I can't say the word, being adaptive in today's where we're at right now is really important. And, you know, staying close to our elders too, making sure that we're checking in on our loved ones and our elders. And one of the things that I want to pass along to everyone was shared to me this morning by one of my elder friends in Shanshayapi, which is Lower Sioux. She said, for us to have strong hearts. And she said, what's going to happen is those of us, you know, who have the strong hearts, you know, we're going to come through this, and we're going to help, you know, other people to, by that leadership with our hearts, it's going to help other people to know which direction to go. Because when the cards land, you know, there's going to be those of us that are still standing, and those of us that have, you know, figured out our compass. So, you know, this is going to pass. And I'm really excited for next year. I'm really excited, you know, for all of your projects and to see what's next for everyone. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.